Hi, I'm Dave Manning. Here we are with my friend and colleague David Goddard at the Dusty Miller in Cheshire. Very kindly let us use this pub. I operate run a company called DM Integration Limited, which is basically a consulting company covering the topic of what we're here to talk about today, which is integrated business planning. I've been in the management consultancy business for many years now, 40 years, having worked with Rolls-Royce cars originally, introducing IBP, although as you'll see from these series of podcasts, it wasn't called that in those days, it was called Sales and Operations Planning. Worked with a group of companies helping us at Rolls-Royce, which were called Oliver Wight, and David's father was one of the people we worked with through Oliver Wight. Then in 1987 I finished with Rolls-Royce and have been working ever since in this role of helping train and educate and support companies with this implementation. At one time worked as a partner with David, who's in the States, that you'll hear in a sec, but since then have been working with myself under a label called DM Integration Limited.
And I'm David Goddard, and I guess I have to admit I'm a friend of Dave Manning's. We've been friends for quite a long time. A similar story to Dave's in that my background is more of an aerospace background. We utilized an earlier form, a quarterly form of S&OP, so
Yeah.
Well, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Achieved Class A results. I thought that I really wanted to join Oliver Wight, given my family history with the company, and thought it is far too common sense. Everybody must understand this. I'm going to do computer consulting. And after a couple of years, I was vastly disillusioned with the software consulting world and realized that unless people understood how to plan, it was very difficult to utilize a tool like an ERP system.
Yeah.
And so I went and joined the Oliver Wight companies. I've been a subcontractor to the Oliver Wight companies for almost 30 years now. And when you picked up the phone and said, "What do you think of a podcast?" Yeah, I thought you were daft, but I'm game. So yeah. Let's make it happen.
Yeah, yeah. I love the story Dave tells sometimes that when he left college, he spoke to his father, who was then the chairman, president of Oliver Wight, and said, "Dad, I want to join the family company." And he said, "You've got no experience, son, and I don't have a job for a driver right now." So you went off and got a real job, learned the trade, and then, indeed, here we are, joined the family firm.
Yeah, pretty frustrating, but at the time. But
yeah, I'm sure. Sense, yeah. But it was typical of your father. David's father was called Walt. Great man, and it was very typical of his dry sort of sense of humor.
And we're back at the Dusty Miller. This is our Pint 1 of our IBP and a Pint series, and Dave and I are looking forward to Pint 4. But Pint 1, we're going to talk a little bit about the origins of IBP, and kind of put it in context. And Dave, one of the things that IBP stands for, Integrated Business Planning. The other night when we were talking, you were kind of, made a good case for, we really got to focus on the integrated part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the integration is the key. We see so many companies where people are doing a great job in their functions, but don't join it all together. And I found it interesting one of the original books about IBP is, as you know, the one your dad wrote called Orchestrating Success. And I think the key word is orchestrating there. I remember somebody saying to me, if you get the best musicians in the world together, the best violinist, the best, etc., and don't have an orchestra, an orchestrator, then it just sounds horrible. But when you pull it all together and integrate it, I think that makes a big difference. So I think that was a stroke of genius, really, to name it that, because it is indeed that framework of we all sing from the same hymn sheet that makes the difference.
Yeah, interesting. I totally agree. And I think back to that book, and some of the words that struck me was talking about multiple departments participating, not being the audience of, but participating in a process where they contributed their perspective but also aligned in direction. And that was quite a big statement. And that book was written in 1988. It's funny how long ago it was now.
Yeah. And yet today we see similar situations where lots of people working hard, doing their best, but actually shooting each other in the foot. And without a process of pulling that together, which, as we know, is the main objective of integrated business planning, I think it's going to be suboptimal. It has to be suboptimal. I think also linked to that, and again in the book there it referenced this, that why do we run in opposite directions? If, as we are in the pub, you've got all of the functions together and described what we're trying to do with integrated business plan, I don't think you'd have any arguments at all. Everybody would agree. But the following morning when people went back to work, all of a sudden they take functional or individual or departmental positions, which I think is largely driven by the way they get measured. You know, if I measure you in that direction and we measure me in that direction, don't be surprised when we go in different directions. And so I think that is also at the heart of the integrated word.
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that. I think of a client that I had. I think they manufactured packaging boxes and things like that. Yeah. And I will likely repeat this term, but they used a phrase often where the executive team would stack hands. And I quite liked the phrase because it said, I know this is not going to be good from the way we measure your performance, and it might be awesome for me, but we all know it's the right thing to do. So we're going to stack hands on the decision and say, this is the direction we've chosen.
That's really interesting, and I think, as we know, IBP is a process, and that's worth mentioning as well, because it's not a meeting; it's a process. Fair. People often say to me, we have an IBP meeting. I said, well, that's not my question. Do you have a process? When do you do IBP? And my answer to that would be, well, you do it every day, 7 days a week type thing. It's continuous. It's how we run our business. But that stack hands is an interesting term, isn't it? Because if in the conversation we would agree that it's the right thing, but we're actually driven to behave differently. And I think, yes, IBP is a process. Yes, it will need some tools, which is going to be a topic of a later pint. But it's actually largely about behaviour.
Sure.
Can we work together for the good of the business as compared to the good of me, my function, etc.?
Yeah, I suspect that one of our future pints is a discussion on implementation, but the behavior change required for a lot of companies is the major stumbling point. We can understand the process, we can get the technology, we can talk about what we're supposed to do, but that behavior change was likely an entire pint. By the way, we're behind.
Oh, right, okay.
It's good to be here with you, friend.
Absolutely, likewise. Hopefully we won't get less convincing after a few pints.
In 1988, I can't remember the exact timing, maybe you do, but there was a time when we moved from manufacturing resource planning into more ERP, right? The terminology.
Yeah.
But about that time was the recognition with S&OP coming on board that it provided so much direction that really manufacturing resource planning, or ERP, whichever the right term in '88 was. I hadn't actually graduated from college, so I don't really remember. But the authors, that was Richard Ling and my dad, Walt, that wrote the original book, and they were convinced that manufacturing resource planning, or ERP, was really just sort of a mid-manager's operational tool if you didn't have IBP or S&OP at the time sitting on top of it and providing that longer range direction.
Yeah, and stability, I think, is a key word there. I agree that MRP, MRP2, ERP, whatever the label it happens to be given nowadays, and of course we're talking about IBP, Integrated Business Planning, but its origins were in sales and operations planning, and we can talk about some of the differences after a few more pints. But I think the stability word is key. If ERP is a set of tools to plan at a detail level the business, I tell stories all the time, and I use an analogy there that without IBP creating some form of stability, then the detail is going to be, you're trying to plan something that's unstable. My whole story of, it's like going on a train and going to the buffet car to buy a couple of cups of coffee. By the time you get back to your seat, you've got 2 halves of coffee because the whole thing's nervous.
Fair enough, yeah.
I think what IBP does is, if done well, creates that framework so you can go and get your coffee while the train's in the station. In other words, there's some stability about it, without which I think ERP is going to be, again, suboptimal. And even divisive in some cases.
Yeah, fair enough. There's a few areas in IBP, S&OP that are fundamental, and I just want to make sure we don't miss them. I don't want to go backwards per se.
No.
A couple of things is that it's a monthly process, and even in the book in 1988 it says, look, if you're going to look at where we are in achieving strategy and possibly course correct, you have to look at it at least monthly, not once a year.
Yeah, I think, and again, that you introduce that as course correct and strategy and business planning. I think it's key to recognise that the objective is of IBP or S&OP before, it doesn't matter. The objective primarily is to deliver the strategic and business plan for the business. And if you only do that once a year, if you only check it once a year, then what chance have you got of making it better? And that also talks to me about it being long term. A lot of companies will say to me, what's the horizon we look over here? The answer is always, as you know, 24 months. Plus, I'll never stop people looking further.
Yeah.
But they say, why would we want to look over that far? Well, again, you go back to the sort of analogy of, if I was to tell you in November of this year that you were going to miss the business plan, what chance have you got of fixing it? It's done and dusted. Yeah. You can jump up and down and be all macho and act, tough, but make no difference.
Try like hell to hit the annual plan.
Exactly. Yeah. If I was to say now, in wherever we are, June, if I was to say in June you're going to miss 2027's plan, then you've got a fighting. I don't know what you could do about it, but you've got a fighting chance. You've got no chance if I tell you in November.
Yeah.
Hence, I think this idea of it being monthly and long term is very important.
So 2 good points: long term, monthly, and then the other thing that I think folks often are surprised at, possibly, is learning to manage a business at a family level.
Yeah.
Right? Like that tends to be a new language sometimes.
Yeah. family meaning aggregate.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Not.
Do you mean something else in the UK?
No.
Okay.
No. That's the terminology I use. But often people say, you mean a product group or an aggregate level, and that's the family. Because if we were, the starting point, that's a great point. Because the starting point of this has got to be, what do we expect to sell, and therefore, what do we need to do to be able to sell that, and is that going to make us any money, etc. But if I was to say, can you tell me which particular SKU, how much of a particular SKU you're going to sell in August of 27, you haven't got a cat's chance.
No.
But if we said, how much of that particular product family, you've got a reasonable chance, a better chance at least. And do you really need to know the detail to 18 months out? For sure, when you get to what we know as the cumulative lead time, when we start to manufacture or purchase the materials, then we need to know whether it's green, blue or red.
Yeah.
But we don't need to know that 18 months away.
Right.
Which
will change 18 times.
Precisely, yeah. And I think that is a mistake people make. They want to or try to operate this at a detail level, an SKU level, and then say, well, of course, that can't possibly work, so therefore we won't do it.
I can remember as a master scheduler and my boss asking me to put together a production plan to support the S&OP process, and I just thought, this information is too dumbed down to make a decision. What if it's these? These are really hard to make. And I'm thinking, my boss needs to know this. And in fact, they didn't. No, they just needed to see the direction the company was going. And I'm thinking, no, I'm a master scheduler. My head is part numbers and quantities and dates.
Yeah.
You can't do this family stuff to me in generalities like sometime in the month, right? But for IBP, it absolutely makes sense.
Absolutely makes sense, yeah. And actually, I think it also says sometimes the families that people think of are not the right ones. Yes, it's a family of this product. But if there are differences in the mix in that product, so one member of that family is very hard to make, very difficult to produce, got long lead time materials, etc. Another one is the exact opposite. They may technically sound like they're in the same family, but they're probably not.
Yeah.
We probably have to make sure that the resources, the complexity, the financial contribution of the members of that family are similar, because then it will work as a family.
Yeah.
If you have to say, can you make that amount of that family in August next year? So that depends. Is it this or that?
Right.
Then it's probably not the right family.
Yeah.
And people don't.
It's a good test, right? It's a good test to see if you've got them.
Yeah.
Your family's worked out.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things, and I don't want to turn this into a science project, but I'd like folks to understand the way there is a progression that is logical, sort of left foot, right foot, if you will, is you can hear wonderful things about IBP. It balances supply and demand. It's got financials. It deploys strategy. We can go on and all these wonderful things. But there is a left foot, right foot, and it is kind of that order that says, don't try and financialize a plan that doesn't balance.
Yeah.
If you got more demand than supply, you're not going to sell that demand, right? That would be a bad revenue number. That's a bad top line, right? And so some people say, oh, geez, it's just demand supply balancing, but that's a big deal. You got to get that right if you want to project financials to understand here's the trade-offs we made in order to balance.
Yeah.
And then if you want to get into strategy, well, you better have demand and supply balancing and a good financial plan in order to know, hey, is the strategy actually working? Is it yielding the financial results?
Yeah.
So I think that's a simple test, kind of like you were saying on testing the families.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And it is left foot, right foot. That's a great way of putting it. It is some basics are here. And I think maybe this will be the lead It's part of our second point. But why do companies have a separate financial planning process? Because actually, people talk to me about what's the financial forecast, jokingly again type thing. There's no such thing as a financial forecast. The financial forecast is a consequence of the balance in supply.
That's a great point.
You know, if I find it, my comment back to people when they say, "Oh, what's the financial forecast?" is, well, you don't make money. Yes, we do. No, you don't make money. You make product. And why do you make product? Because you're going to sell that product. And the consequence of balancing supply and demand results in the money. And so it cannot have a life of its own, and yet very often does.
Perfect. Dude, we got to get on with our play.
Yeah.